Well, joining me now is Daily Telegraph columnist Piers Akerman. Piers, welcome. Let's start with jobs. Australia's unemployment rate remains steady at 3.5%. That's according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics. It says that 53,000 Australians found jobs in March, including a rise in full-time workers by more than 72,000. We've got a 50-year low in the unemployment rate. Despite tough economic conditions, I was a bit stumped by these figures. Piers, what about you? Were you surprised?
Well, they're very impressive. I'm trying to look for the breakdown between skilled jobs and unskilled labour. There was a good rise in women's employment, Cory. I'm not quite sure, though, where this leaves the Reserve Bank and the federal budget next month. The Reserve Bank is due to bring down have its next board meeting on May 2, which is a week before the budget's due to be delivered. Now, it would be, given the Reserve Bank Board's history of and admission of grave errors in not raising interest rates earlier, it would be a very brave board which says that it'll give another a hike a week before the federal budget. So I suspect that these impressive job figures will put pressure on interest rates, but it really is to be seen whether they're prepared to whack the taxpayer yet again in the week before a very political budget's delivered.
Yeah, and from a very political Reserve Bank board, if I may say so. Plus, you've got to look, Piers, I don't know how it can get better for the government on these figures, because they're bringing in hundreds of thousands of unskilled migrants and students coming through. So you would think unemployment is going to have to rise from here. Well,
this government doesn't understand economics. You only have to look. Chalmers is a learning on the job. Bringing in unskilled workers to Australia is not a great solution. It just puts more pressure on housing. And as we've seen from stories in the press recently, critical workers, nurses, police and fire people can't afford metropolitan house prices, let alone rents. So the government's really throwing more petrol on the fire of house prices and rents, and I think they're adding to the problem. They're doing very little to solve it.
Yeah, now you mentioned just before that the Reserve Bank admitted to doing a terrible job to rein in inflation, and we know that Australian families have been warned now that inflation is going to linger for longer than previously expected. Economists are predicting that incomes will remain steady, if not drop slightly towards the end of the year. So after 10 straight interest rate rises, a record number, I mean, how can we trust their judgment no matter what they're doing? Do we need wholesale review of how they go about their business?
Well, I think the structure is actually not that bad, but I think that they've, as they admitted, made a huge error. Quite frankly, the interest rates that we're experiencing now historically are not in the sort of league that they were under Paul Keating. We just have a whole bunch of millennials who've never experienced a rate rise. They thought that the sort of 3-year holiday they had when they were paying zero or very minimal interest was the norm, and it's not, as you and I both remember. So I think the Reserve Bank, should overlook some of the whinging and whining. I think the greater threat to the economy is the new demand that the unions are going to put on the government with the budget to make sure that their members get hefty wage rises, which again will put more pressure on the interest rates.
Yeah, it's going to be a huge challenge for them. And of course, as you mentioned already, the Treasurer is preparing his second budget in May. His first one, I think, was in October last year. What do you think we could expect to see, given the sort of rhetoric that's coming out of the Treasurer's office and the government?
Well, what we won't see, let me begin with that. What we won't see are any cuts to spending. And you and I both, have been around in Canberra for long enough to know that there is waste everywhere in government procurement. There's total mismanagement of government services. We had Bill Shorten, talk. He acknowledges at least that the NDIS is going to really blow out, and that he can't get onto the rorts that are there. And when he went on the radio earlier today, apparently the Twitter feed just exploded with people saying, "Stop the rorts, stop the rorts." Now, this is a government which has never stopped a rort. It likes rorts. I mean, the unions are all in for rorting. Now, what we will probably see, of course, we must see, is more defence spending. We've got to start preparing for the AUKUS submarines, although this government is still saying that, it's too far off to make a decision on where these will be based. We should be making those decisions now, so we get the infrastructure in place, we can get the labour force trained up, we should have the young people doing nuclear physics, nuclear engineering, nuclear science, and getting them all prepared for the jobs that will flow. In fact, the other story that caught my eye was the apparent decision by Anthony Albanese not to attend the NATO meeting after he was invited. Now, this is, I think, given that we are a huge contributor to Ukraine's defence, I think we've now sent some 90-odd Bushmaster vehicles, and we're the biggest supporter of Ukraine outside the NATO nations. This is a huge a slap in the face for those countries which offered him a place at the table as an observer.
Yeah, very strange. You normally make sure someone can attend before you extend the invitation. Hey, before I let you go, there's been this talk about cigarettes and vaping this week. Well, in South Australia, vaping has been banned effectively. And under legislation today, e-cigarettes in outdoor spaces such as schools, shops, beaches and sporting grounds is outlawed. Now, these are very big changes. Vaping is less dangerous or less unhealthy than smoking cigarettes. And quite frankly, I was, accosted by a vapor today in the street, and it was nowhere near as offensive as cigarette smoke. But people want to ban it nationwide. Do you reckon this is a good move or not, Piers?
Cory, you know me, I'm totally opposed to any extension of the nanny state. And the most interesting thing here is that in the UK, the Department of Health there is now, or Ministry of Health, is now encouraging people to vape because they hope that it'll wean them off the stronger nicotine that's found in cigarettes. Now, we all know that some vapes do contain traces of nicotine, to some level. But when you have a government on one side of the world saying, take up vaping, get off cigarettes, and the other side of the world we have a Labor nanny state, we know best for you, you stop vaping, it just doesn't make sense.
Yes, one of them's not following the science, and isn't that what we're always told to do? Piers Akerman, thanks very much for joining me on Sharry tonight. Really appreciate it.